Hello Art34, this is your sketching example. So I do have an example of the I am statements and 5 memory or event questions that I have answered as an example in Google Classroom. I'm going to refer to those as I do my sketches. So you got a piece of newspaper, an old school wooden pencil for drawing, there's white paper and a chunk of the newspaper, and this is your sketch paper. Okay, so I pre-drew my borders with a ruler all the way around, kind of small, about 1/2 inch. Then I wrote my first name, last name, period 3, and then I folded this piece in half, long ways, hot dog style, and just kind of did a little pencil at the top to then visually separate my first sketch from my second sketch. So I'm going to write, this is number 1, and this will be number 2. Okay, so I'm going to fold this just to make it a little bit easier to draw on. Okay, so the first thing I look at when starting out is what kind of visual flow do I want overall for all 5 memories and events to be on my paper? So I definitely want some kind of like spirally flow to bring the eye in and maybe up and then down. Actually, you guys can't see that. Okay, let me draw a little bit darker. So remember, draw super lightly. Perhaps another memory or event comes over, and then I want to bring the eye back in. So I kind of sketch out what kind of movement I want the eye to flow with, and you want to always bring your eye back in. You don't really want like all 5 memories events lined up, because then you want to think about proportion and maybe think about the most important memory or event. So I have one with my grandmother. I have one about the grueling schedule of high school. I have one about my first European trip. I have another memory or event about the first time I living alone. And then I have one about when my mom was diagnosed with cancer. So I would say the memory that has had the most impact on my life was probably high school and like just the grueling schedule. So I'm going to kind of reserve a larger area for that. Maybe like this whole area will be that one memory. You can have, I've had people do like 4 memories and then one kind of sprinkled in throughout. You can break it up however you want. I would maybe think of like the most important one, and maybe that one takes up more space on your paper. Okay, so my memory of my grandmother putting sugar on my grapefruit. I said the shape that I could use to narrate is circles and to represent my mom, my grandmother, and me, plus little sugar granules, and maybe triangles for the section of grapefruit. So I'm going to start out maybe using circles for my grandmother, and then my mom, and then me. Okay, and then maybe I want to repeat that just for visual interest. So my grandmother, my mom, and then me. Okay, then I talked about the grapefruit sections, like triangles. So perhaps I want to do like curved, kind of triangular sections of the piece of grapefruit. Kind of erase that a little bit. I don't really need that line anymore. Okay, maybe I'm going to add another of my grandmother, my mother, and me. So I have repetition, it kind of moves my eye over, but I need something kind of to flow into the next little section. So for now, I'm going to kind of repeat that of the big, medium, and small, leading into the next memory or event. Okay, so then my next one is the grueling schedule of high school. All right, so I said shapes. I should squares represent days on a calendar and kind of a spirally perspective. So I'm actually going to have it be an angular spiral, put that in there. So I said squares, and I also want, you know, some overlap. So perhaps I'm going to do like another square, everything's going to pretty much start out with like shape and line. Okay, more, and then maybe they get smaller inside. And then to kind of bring this sketch into here so it doesn't look like super curvy and then super angular, then I'm going to throw just some circles for repetition. Or I guess it could represent the dates on a calendar. Okay, etc. So then I would add more and probably add a couple like flying off, going off the page. Maybe a couple squares coming over here. So you also want variety of size, like different sizes, etc. Okay, so that was the basic for that memory event. Okay, so then I said my first European trip with my very good friend and my brother. So I said rectangles to illustrate a suitcase, train cars, and old buildings. All right, so I mean, that's just like a fun memory event. I don't think it had a huge impact, so maybe I'm just going to do a little bit of that down at the bottom. Like the train cars, or if I wanted to do more of like a, maybe they're getting bigger, and then like a half circle, like as a suitcase, kind of like an abstracted suitcase, which I guess I could do another of that. Where I've separated it, they're not connected. Like I couldn't tell it was a suitcase unless, you know, or you can't tell it was a suitcase unless I told you. And maybe like a road, or maybe like train tracks. And somehow it just kind of goes away. So I do like that linear aspect. I might go back and add some linear into this side too. Okay, so that's the basics for that one. All right, then my next memory event was renting a house for the first time by myself, or living alone for the first time by myself. I said shapes, different sized rectangles and squares. Okay, I didn't realize I have so many rectangles and squares. Okay, so then perhaps I'm going to go bigger, and I'm going to put rectangles and squares inside a big rectangle to represent rooms in a house, because I rented like a 2-bedroom house, and that was the most rooms I'd ever had, like to myself, ever in my whole life. Okay, and then perhaps I would throw a couple circles from this other one onto there. All right, so then my last memory is when my mom was diagnosed with cancer in 2017. She's fine now. Oh, well, she's doing okay now. And so I said, as far as shape goes, curved, bumpy shapes to symbolize cancer and the colon, and triangles to represent surgery and stress. Okay, well, I have this area here, so then perhaps coming in behind, so I have some overlap. So this kind of represents like the colon, lumpy, bumpy, behind. I also said triangles to represent surgery. So perhaps I'm going to do triangles, a couple, and maybe I just want to overlap that too. Okay, so that's how you would start with shape and line. Then you can go back and pull out of your graphic organizer. So for that first memory event, I talked about like textures or types of line, flowy lines. Okay, so then I'm going to go back and probably work into line. Flowy lines of the sugar falling. But instead of just a line, because later I'm going to have to go back and add color into it, or I'm going to have to add value, or I'm going to do something with it, then I'm going to go back and make it a double line or a thickness of a line so I can add something later. So if you have just single lines, like over here, I would probably go back and make those a thickness of a line that I can add color, or I can add a little pattern into. So as you're sketching away, you do need to have all the elements and principles represented. So every single one, there is a slide example in our Google Classroom. And on Friday, you will get color information, and so then you're going to add color and value to your favorite one. But you're going to do 2 sketches, so 2 different ones. Like I kind of look at what do I like. So I really like this part, how it flows. So I might do that similar over here, but maybe I want this to kind of flow up and over. So maybe I'm going to then take that part that I kind of like, flow it up and over, and maybe I'm going to change this part. Like I don't love these little triangle things, so I'm going to take those out, but I do like this symbol for my grandmother, my mother, and me. So I'm going to keep that in this section. So pull out what you like about the first one and put it in the second one and try a different version of your sketch with all 5 memories and events.